In this video, this audio, I'm going to be explaining my U.S. soccer mandate. We're now on step 4 of the entire process. It's a 5-step process. And just real quick about me, I'm Kyle, the Angry Soccer Guy. And I've played at every single level of youth soccer, from rec to competitive or travel, it was called at the time, to DA, which was what MLS Next was prior. And played Division II college, played semi-professionally, represented the United States men's national team at the AMF Futsal World Cup in 2019. And I've trained professional players, including Luis Nani, Benji Michel, Dom Dwyer, Roan Teixeira. I've trained Cauã Basil, the future generational talent coming out of Brazil. So I've done everything in between, so I have a lot of experience. And I'm going to be showing you this roadmap here for the U.S. soccer mandate to take effect after the 2026 World Cup. And we're going to look at what today's topic is. So we have 5 things. We've already done number 1. So 5 immediate and impactful changes to grow the game in the right way and meet the players at their level after the 2026 World Cup. So we've already talked about changing player formats. We've talked about improving coaching education, which needs to be centered around pay-to-play. We need to suspend, or I've already talked about suspending senior national teams and why. We're now at step 4, which is removal of all associations and governing bodies. Okay, and I'm going to walk you through what this means, what it looks like, and you might understand here shortly what I'm talking about. So we want to unify the entire country under U.S. soccer's jurisdiction, under one governing body and association. Okay? So we currently have 8 to 12, I can think of 8 on the top of my head. I'll give you the number or the names in a second, in the country. So 8 to 12 associations in the country that give player cards, rosters, and coaches cards. This also means insurance. And each league has to be affiliated to a specific league, or each association has to be affiliated to a certain league. Okay, so this means you don't have access to all the leagues under one governing body. So, for example, my organization is under USYS, which in the state of Florida is called Florida Youth Soccer Association. We are given access to certain leagues under FYSA. Same thing under US Club Soccer. Same thing under whatever other leagues and platforms there are. Like, it's kind of nuts. Okay? And it's weird, though, because tournaments, they'll accept anything. So it's very strange. But the more cards that you have, so the more associations you go under, the more cards you have. So very quickly off the top of my head, USYS, US Club Soccer, Say Soccer, UPSL, AYSO, USSSA, there's another one, United Futsal. That's 7 right there. And there's another one off the top of my head I'm drawing a blank on. But there's 7 I just gave you right there where a player, coach, and team can be rostered under all of these. And there's more. I don't remember all of them on the top of my head. Okay, but there's 8 to 12 of them. I just gave you 7. Right? So you can be registered under all 7 of those for affiliations. It's absolutely bonkers. Now, what this means is we want to do unification. We want to register under one system. So one player carding and rostering system. So this means we register under U.S. Soccer. It's under one pillar, under one association. So it can be called U.S. Youth Soccer. I don't care what the name is, but it's all under one umbrella. Okay? Because that way it's very clear, it's very precise, and I'll explain in a little bit more detail why. Okay? Then we go back to having promotion and relegation in youth. If you earn it, you play it. So currently, like, my club could not have a team in MLS Next or ECNL. Not that I would want it, because I don't want to support those platforms, but you have to basically pay your way in by having a certain number of teams, certain number of fields, certain number of infrastructure to be able to do this, right? To get to MLS Next, to get into ECNL. And you have to have a certain number of teams committed and they have to approve you. Whereas if you open the system and everybody, and it can be under one, it can be per state. I don't care. But the key thing is you should be able to work your way up to the top or drop down based on performance. It should be all performance based in competitive. Okay? You can set it up by region. So, like ODP had it by region. Region 1, Region 2, Region 3, Region 4. Maybe you need to make more. Maybe it needs to be 8 regions. Fine. But it could even be by state. And we can work those details out later. But let's set it up in the correct manner to at least build the infrastructure correctly. Okay? By having this, potentially allows for compensation for formation and solidarity payments to take over in the near future under a unified process. Okay, so that sounds like a lot of jargon. It is jargon, but basically what that means is soccer under this way could be free for kids to play, or at extremely reduced cost if it wasn't free. So we're talking like $50 a year, $100 a year, something like that. Okay, this means almost all clubs would have a reason to make soccer free or dirt cheap. This also has to be The same thing for pro, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, but I'm trying to give you those nuggets so you understand how this all kind of relates back to the context. So let's talk about professional for a second, and then I'm going to tie it all back together. So the FIFA president came out and said, we need to end pay-to-play in America. He's right. Pay-to-play probably should end because there's kids that can't pay to play. Agreed. However, he did not tell you half the story. He gave you the end pay-to-play part. He didn't talk about the other half that will basically say or stop pay-to-play from ending. So I'm going to give you the answer now why it won't happen, at least in my lifetime, because there's too much money involved. So how this works is he comes out and says pay-to-play needs to end. Awesome. I think a lot of people are on the same page. Here's why, though, pay-to-play won't end. Because FIFA, US Soccer, and MLS created a backdoor deal to protect MLS as a entity that cannot be touched as the premier division in the United States. So MLS is the top division in the United States. Because, you got to remember, years before, right when I was born or even earlier, there were leagues that tried to be professional or that were professional that folded. So they were trying to grant protection. So it wasn't bad in theory, but they were trying to grant protection to MLS to say, hey, we're going to support you to allow you to grow. Nobody can challenge your Division I status. Nobody. That's still in case today. Now you wonder why we have, in my opinion, the greatest part of pay to play in adult football, which is MLS. How much does it cost to get into MLS? You need to pay to play. $300+ million, if not higher, if you want to get a franchise. So you're going to see where this is going in a second. So if I have to pay, let's just call it 300. If I have to pay $300 million to get a franchise into the top league of MLS or top league in the country, well, if I'm a smart businessman, I'm not losing my money, right? I didn't make this investment to lose my money. I made this investment to make more money. Do you see where I'm going with this? So promotion and relegation at the professional level will not happen because in the MLS level, if I have to pay $300 million to get a franchise, I could be relegated the first year. I just lost $150 million in 1 year, in 10 months. That's insane. So that's why I'm telling you it won't happen. So if you tie it all together, because MLS, FIFA, and US Soccer made this backdoor deal, there's actually lawsuits going on right now to try and end MLS's monopoly, so to speak. But with this going on, nobody can touch MLS, and the only people that can open the door to allow all this to change would be MLS. So understand from their business model, they want to protect their asset, which are the entity of MLS, their clubs, their jurisdiction. Nobody's cracking that. If it gets cracked, and then we can have promotion and relegation, well, then we can talk about soccer being free for kids like the FIFA president came out and said. But until that status is, ripped apart, soccer for kids will never be free because MLS controls it. MLS has the biggest version of pay-to-play in the world, in my opinion, right? Because it's $300+ million to get a franchise. And guess who are the only organizations that have an incentive to be free? Remember how I was talking about training compensation? Right, so I mentioned potentially allows for compensation for formation and solidarity payments. This is why soccer is free in other parts of the world, because they're using training compensation to give kids a platform for free, because basically the club takes the risk on the kids. Let's say they take 20 players. One of them goes and becomes a professional. And I'm giving you the very simple term here. It's way more complex than this, but I'm just trying to provide you quick context. So if I take 20 kids and I can use training compensation, compensation for formation, and solidarity payments, and I get one of them to be a professional, I then sell him to another club outside of my area, outside of my country. I make money on this kid. So it's a long-term investment versus a short-term investment, right? So pay to play is short-term. I get the money up front. Compensation for formation is the long-term. I pay for these kids. In 7 years, I get my money back and more, for reference, okay? But the only person or the only organizations in the United States that can actually earn compensation for formation and solidarity payments, can you guess who it is? MLS. Only the MLS academies, so Orlando City Academy, DC United Academy, Atlanta United Academy, LAFC Academy, so on and so forth. They're the only organizations that can get training compensation. So I have a club. My club cannot receive training compensation for players because FIFA has this deal with MLS. MLS has now said, okay, we'll take the training compensation because they were losing money on players. So basically European clubs were coming in and picking up 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, taking them to Europe. MLS was losing the money on these kids because of pay-to-play. Now, with this format, the way that it's structured, the only clubs in the country, whatever, I think there's 30, right? 28, 30, whatever the number is. They're the only ones in the entire country that can get training compensation. That's why they're free. So, just to quickly recap, MLS controls it all. They have a deal with FIFA and US Soccer. It's being challenged right now in the court system. If it were to go through, you could potentially rip up these agreements and then potentially open the door where there could be promotion and relegation for the adult leagues. So that means a team in UPSL could go to NISA. NISA could go to USL 1, USL Championship to MLS. And it's very poorly structured because they're all different organizations. But that would be the potential roadmap. And then vice versa. A team in MLS could go from MLS to USL Championship to USL 1, so on and so forth down. Now, remember, MLS owners aren't going to want to have that happen. And then the final note is, with MLS, is it's a single entity. That means MLS controls everything, even the clubs. They control everything. So each club is not its own entity technically because it all goes through MLS. It's a very weird thing, but that's how they protect the asset. So the asset of MLS is to pay to play. So this can't happen until MLS, bring it back 1 second, right? This can't happen, I'm sorry. Pay to play cannot end, in my humble opinion, until MLS lets control of it. But they're not going to let control. If you had let's say there's 30 of them, right? And they're all 300 million. Obviously there were some from before and whatnot, but let's just call it a flat number, 300 million per franchise. Okay, well, that is a stupid amount of money. Do you think any of the owners would want to see their money lost? You might not be a business owner, but let's say you go and start a business. You're starting a business to go make money. They're not wanting to lose their money. So this won't happen. The end of pay to play won't happen. And I wish he would have said the other part, but they can't because of the deal they set up a long time ago. And that's why it's being challenged in the courts right now. So it's kind of nuts that he came out and said this, but he didn't talk about how it would happen, which I just presented to you. So, because just to quickly clarify, this pay to play exists because there's no financial incentive. So there's a reason why I call them cash cows, right? Cash cows, they're not providing any more value to the marketplace. Nobody's coming out and telling you this like I am, okay? So nobody's providing value to the marketplace. From a cash cow perspective, they're just trying to collect the pay to play. Pay me and I'll provide a platform for your child to play. I hope that makes sense. So because there's no incentive to say, hey, I'm going to take these 20 kids, maybe one of them becomes a professional and then I make money on the back end. That doesn't happen here. So there's a couple of people probably like myself that says, you know what? We want to try and develop. Well, we don't make money on the back end. The only way we can make money is on the front end. So we have to say, hey, pay us. We'll train your kid to get better and whatnot. Now, I've tried to do this. I've sat down with a couple of parents and said, hey, we'll sign an agreement with you where your player is free, but we get 10 or 15% of their rights, whatever the percentage was. Okay? Nobody agreed to it, by the way. Nobody said, hey, I don't want that. They said, I'd rather pay. Okay, pay then. Right? Because that's how this would work. But that would be a contract from organization to family to say, hey, we're going to sign this with you. You stay with us. We present you options. We develop your child. We help you get out. When they sign a professional contract, we get a percentage. That's it. Right? But most people won't sign that because then they lose their rights to their kids. So this is where this all becomes a thing, because in compensation for formation, the parents are giving up the rights to their kids. They're giving it to the clubs that are saying, hey, I'll pay for your child, but that means I can then sell him to make money. Right? So it's this whole complex process. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. I hope it makes sense at least. So looking at this. Now, unification continuing. I'm going to talk about this later, but I'll just quickly highlight it. I don't believe that MLS will do the right thing for the kids at the end of the day. Okay? Now, I wrote here, I would not want this under the MLS umbrella as they are currently trying to grab the market. So they're trying to complete a monopoly and restrict other organizations. So if the platform unified and it was MLS as the, sole manager of this platform, top to bottom, I'm out. No way in hell would I want this because, again, I don't think MLS would do it in the best interest of the kids. They're going to say, hey, we're a business. Let's do what we need to do to protect the business assets. And like, you'll see there's MLS, MLS Next Pro, MLS Next. Now they've created MLS Go. That's the recreational version. So now they've pivoted all the way to the bottom of the chain to start MLS Go. Don't you think they're going to want to close the gap in between? So they're going to have MLS Go, whatever they're going to have in between that. So like MLS Travel, MLS Competitive, and they're going to try and close the gap like this. So MLS is here, the Pro, to MLS Go. They're going to try and squeeze the gap. They already have MLS, MLS Next Pro, MLS Next, and they have two versions. They have two versions of MLS Next Pay-2-Play, and MLS Next Pro Pathway, which most people don't even know. And then you have MLS Go. They're going to squeeze it like this and bring it together and create whatever platform in between. Okay, so, however, the Federation of U.S. Soccer, so U.S. Soccer Federation, could work to recreate state associations. So we have to, long story short, we have a big wound. We got a fat Band-Aid on this thing. You got to rip that sucker off and say, we're redoing this whole thing. The whole thing needs to be restructured, top to bottom. Okay, and actually create a system that works for the people, so kids, and allows promotion and relegation within a region. So I said region, it could be state, it could be whatever, but we need to go back to where it was, where you could be promoted or relegated. Okay, and I think that's really important to have, and I just want to make sure this is understood here. I am not a fan if MLS says, I'm going to take control of everything, because they're not going to do what's the right thing for the kids, and I'll give you a very quick story. So, when I first started posting my content, a very famous celebrity reached out to me, and he's like, hey Kyle, I need to talk to you, I need your help. I'm like, cool. He is super connected with one MLS club. And he's like, hey, I need help getting kids out. You have a lot of answers, maybe you can help me. And I'm like, I'm looking at all the stuff, and I'm like, bro, you're connected with this organization, just send your kids there. He's like, they don't want the kids. He literally told me they're forced to have an academy. So he told me that the MLS club told him that they're forced to have an academy because MLS wants to have training compensation on kids, which, okay. But he said the issue is they don't actually want it. They want to go to South America, find a kid that's 17 to 21 years old, sign him for $1 million. They're going to spend $4 million over 2 or 3 years for his salary and whatever else they have to pay for. So let's say they're all in on $5 million. They go sell this kid for $20 to $30 million. That's a $15 to $25 million profit on one kid. That is the business model currently of MLS. So that means the kids are not the platform. And then if you flip it a different way, think of it externally this way. Look at the MLS academies. Okay, Florida, Orlando City, Inter Miami. You have a pool of 30 million people in Florida, but they can only select 20 to 30 kids per age group. So there's not a lot of kids getting an opportunity to go to those academies. So I'm not saying that they don't do this. I'm just highlighting the fact that this is potentially possible. Well, if everybody wants to go to Orlando City or Inter Miami or Austin FC or LAFC, everybody wants to go to these academies because this is where the best players are, potentially, and this is where it's free. So knowing that, and then they're telling you it's a pathway to pro, which, yes, potentially it's a pathway to pro. So if you know that, and they know that, do they actually have to develop somebody? Or because it's free, they have a database of hundreds of kids, if not thousands of kids, where they can say, you know what? This kid in our academy is no longer performing. Drop him. Let's go pick this kid from X club. Okay, this one from Y is not performing. Drop him. Let's go pick this kid from B club. So they don't, I'm not saying they don't, I'm just providing potential context. They don't actually have to necessarily develop players. They can always just handpick new ones and bring them in. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm not saying they don't develop. I'm saying they don't have to develop because all the other clubs, you know, I think the radius is 100 miles. They can pick any kid within 100 miles. Boom, he's going to come to the academy. So there's just a lot of things that, you know, MLS has created. I don't blame them because they're a business. They're trying to protect their asset. And that's why, like, the protected list exists, which is nuts, right? The block list, the protected list, where Orlando City or any club in MLS, using Orlando because I live in Orlando, can block a kid within 100 miles, give or take, of the academy. So even if the kid does not play for and has never played for Orlando City or Inter Miami or whatever club, MLS club, they could be on the protected list, which means no other MLS academy can come pick that kid up without paying a fee or at least negotiating something from allocation money, so a transfer. It's nuts, and that should not stand because there's no way that kids could be blocked that aren't in the academy. Like, it's absurd. My personal opinion. So a lot of people probably agree. Some people maybe don't agree. Understand. I think if you want to protect your kids in your academy, cool. Protect the kids in the academy. Like, that's fine. But MLS is smart because, again, they're the only top-tier program in the country. So by being the only top-tier program, the Division I league, they can do essentially anything they want. They have all these protections. That's why all these lawsuits are starting to happen now. Again, it's potentially MLS. So just, you need to understand all this. I hope it makes a lot of sense. But to finalize and summarize, again, I talked about the player carding system. There's 8 to 12 of them right now. Parents shouldn't have to pay for multiple associations for player cards to have their children play soccer. If it's all under one thing, problem solved. Also, people have asked me, well, Kyle, what's your idea on guest playing? I love guest playing. Guest playing should be allowed as long as current club doesn't have an event. So this is our policy. We have a team. Let's say we have a team that's 2014. One example. Okay. As long as we don't have a game or some sort of event, practice, whatever scheduled, the kids can go guest play all they want as long as you can communicate with me and say, hey, are you okay with little Johnny guest playing this weekend and this weekend? Yes. Most other places won't allow you to guest play because they're afraid that you're going to see what they're doing and you're going to want to leave and go somewhere else. Business. Okay? Now, trying to make all this happen where the associations also collapse are going to be very hard because they're making ridiculous amounts of money. I have a friend who works for one of the associations. Dude, he told me straight up, he's like, we have $50 million in the bank. I'm like, yo, you guys have $50 million in the bank? I'm rounding up. It was under 50, but you get the point. It's millions of dollars. Let's just call it millions. It's millions of dollars in the bank that this association has. They could pay for kids to play soccer, but they're not going to do that, obviously. So there's just so many things going into this, and this would be probably one of, if not the most painful processes to remove the associations and kill pay-to-play leagues because you're just killing business, right? So this whole thing, you have to understand. And if you don't, I'll try and quickly explain to you. This whole thing, MLS, anything, is a business, straight up business. So look at the leagues. If we say, hey, these leagues are folding because we want to restructure, you're going to have a lot of pissed off people creating lawsuits. This whole thing is going to be almost terrible to rip this Band-Aid off, to actually fix this whole thing because there's so much money involved before you can even get to training compensation. Because if you go to training compensation, who's going to pay for all this stuff? The tournaments, the leagues, the player carding, all this stuff. So yeah, pay to play needs to end. How do you restructure without killing the top? So by killing the top, killing MLS to break that barrier to allow it all to be free. But then once you break that barrier, you have about 50 other barriers that you got to break because you have ECNL, you have MLS Next, you have all these other leagues, you have all these other state associations. This is why it's going to be, and I keep telling you, in my lifetime for this to end. And I believe that the key to this whole thing, believe it or not, is parents. And people have asked me, well, how do we stop this? If parents stop paying for pay to play and there's no more of a market because kids aren't playing for these leagues and whatnot, it will eventually have to crack, right? That pressure will have to crack. And I've already said club soccer needs to die. Club soccer needs to die. Like grassroots clubs that don't have all the badges, you could probably stay. But the ones that want to be in MLS Next and ECNL and all this alphabet soup leagues, those need to crack because you're just fueling the flame. Now, it's not going to happen again in my lifetime. But the only way that it could happen would be parents. And we look at the Utah Youth Soccer Association, right? So a bunch of parents got pissed off. About 50 people to 100 people sent me a DM saying, Kyle, we want your support because we don't like this amendment change. I read the amendment change and I could tell what they were trying to do, which was not a good thing for kids. But I'm like, hey, you know what? You guys need to come out and explain and just be transparent. Then they came out shortly after and said, hey, we're making an amendment. We're going to table this for another time. And so the voice of people were heard. But if we don't come together as a nation to say, you know what, we're going to step up to make these changes, dude, you can forget it. This whole thing will continue for a long time. And that's why, I've made the decision that we're moving our organization from pay to play to pay to learn because pay to play is not going to go away. But what I can promise you is your child will learn, and we're building a private school because we want to have a platform where we can actually teach, not just pay for your child to play. We want to teach. We want to improve the person holistically, the person first, how to be a good person. 2, Improve the student. Be a good student. So that way you can have success in the future. Education is key. Third, improve the athlete or the player. That would be the third piece of this whole thing, because you can't guarantee that somebody will be a professional anyways. So hopefully this all makes sense, man. And there's a lot that comes with this. So the next final piece we're going to talk about won't be in this video, it'll be another one, but it would be the final piece of this 5-step process, the framework, parent education. And we'll see that video shortly. So without further ado, guys, thank you so much. And I'll see you in the next video. This will be live, by the way. You can come back and watch.